Taken a long hiatus from teaching on the essence of the vast and the profound. I was teaching some of my students for a year on the subject of basically how to actually train in meditation. And now that we've covered the 5 basic cognitive skills for training in meditation, I want to go back to actually applying those skills to developing the aspects of the path. So this text, for those of you who randomly find this video later, the essence of the vast and the profound, is, I don't know if that helps. Does that help? The essence of the vast and the profound. This text is written by Pabonka Rinpoche, and Pabonka Rinpoche is a relatively recent modern master, extremely important in my lineage, my main lineage. And it was compiled and edited, as you can see there, by Trijong Rinpoche. And Trijong Rinpoche was the direct teacher of one of my heart teachers. And furthermore, this is in part a commentary on the Panchen Lama's Swift Path, which is another great Lamrim text. So hard to overstate rather the blessings of this particular text. So previous to this, we have gone through a whole bunch of this text. We're now on page 218. So if anybody wants to get all of the recordings previous to this, they were audio recordings. I'm now switching over to video so that my main platform for teaching will now be YouTube, I think. And today we're going to continue with page 218 of the Essence of the Vast and the Profound, and we're discussing what is considered to be actually still preliminary to the stages of the path, technically, although it depends a bit on who you ask. And we're talking about how to please your teachers, how to please your guru. And just to back up a little bit, because it's been quite a while, this word guru means heavy with qualities. So it's how you please someone who has much greater qualities than you in terms of spiritual development. What is it that brings pleasure to that person's mind? Well, the thing that really brings a great deal of pleasure to your teacher's mind, as it says here in the text, is the main thing is the offering to be made in return for my help is to practice in accordance with my instructions. So that's a quote from the Buddha in the Jataka Tales. J. Milarepa, who some of you will know, a great Indian saint, said, "I repay the kindness of my guru through practice." So the main thing that you do to repay your teachers through your actions is benefiting them through practice. Okay? So that's the main effort, the main thing that you do. And that's the main recommendation they give here. Of course, there are also other things you can do. You know, anybody that you respected a great deal, you would probably, the word they use here is veneration, but anyone you respect a great deal, you would have pleasant things to say about them and pleasant things to say to them. You'd say, oh yeah, you know, my professor in college, they put in all this effort, they really helped me, right? That's verbally venerating your professor in college. Someone says, hello, hello, hello. Since you've made 2 comments, you're now my #1 fan, apparently. So I'm doing well. Thank you for asking. So if anyone, now that there's quite a few people in the chat and quite a few people, yeah, okay, Cleric, you were here, weren't you, Cleric, for part of the retreat? Am I making that up? I can't remember. Okay, so the second thing it says is material offerings. So again, you know, if you had somebody who had benefited you greatly, even in a conventional sense, you might want to take them out for lunch. Oh. The gentleman says it's his first stream. Okay. So you might want to take them out for lunch. You might want to get them something. You might want to get them a little gift for doing things that are good for you. So even in a conventional sense, you might have nice things to say, you might have a respectful attitude, you might want to provide material gifts to people that are benefiting you in quite ordinary ways. So the same is true of a quote-unquote spiritual guru, which is, again, this word guru sounds quite foreign and sort of maybe evokes the wrong sorts of things, but what the word literally means is heavy with qualities. So it's a person that has a great deal more internal spiritual capability than yourself. Likewise, it says providing service. So, of course, once again, you know, if somebody had benefited you greatly in conventional ways, you would, of course, want to do whatever you could to try to return the favor, to try to return the kindness that they had given you. So that might involve certain acts of service. And so you see what is a relatively conventional relationship in terms of sort of, wow, you've done something really great for me, all of a sudden starts to sound kind of like religion, right? And then finally, of course, it mentions practice. But this is, despite being mentioned last on this quote that I'm reading from is now from the Ornament of the Mahayana Sutras. Despite being listed last there in that list, that's actually the primary thing. If someone is giving you advice on the Buddhist spiritual path, the main way that you repay all of the time, the effort, etc., that they're expending to benefit you, the main way that you return that kindness that they're showing you is to actually try to benefit them is to benefit them, is to respect their teachings rather through putting them into practice, right? This is the big way that you do this. For those of you who attended the retreat, which is not very many of you, I would guess. I got a lot more people saying hello in the chat. Hello, hello, hello. If there are questions about the material that we're going through, please do put them in the chat. How much of this do I want to go over? Somebody says it looks like I lost an argument with shampoo. It's true. I need a haircut. From the time we begin to right. So one of the things, there's another large block of quote here. Another thing that they're mentioning is quite a few people who train in these kinds of systems, they want to jump from the beginning, from the early stuff, to the most advanced, the most sophisticated, the most how to say, sort of profound technique. They want to jump from doing nothing to the most sophisticated thing on the planet, right? So, J. Drolwe Gongpo, the 15th century saint, said, basically one way you can repay the kindness of your teachers is to not do that, okay? So, if you, how to say, how do I put this? The essence of this very large block of text, which you can read if you get the book yourself on 219, is this. One of the ways that you can repay the kindness of your teachers is to not jump way ahead in the material, to not jump from knowing absolutely nothing to trying to get a tantric empowerment, or jumping from knowing very little to and frankly having very little capability all the way to, oh well, can you give me the most profound, the most secret, the most blah 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 blah, right? So this sort of thing is this sort of thing is going to slow you down in terms of your progress. So it's very important that you don't do that. And for those of you who attended the retreat recently, there's a really interesting block of text here on 219 where he says, oh, this is so good. He says, if you concentrate on a sentence about objects of attachment, from beginning to end, you'll be focusing on the mind of attachment. So, if you, how do I put this? So even in meditation, if you're sitting in meditation and your mind is completely grasping onto the object of meditation for dear life, out of attachment, out of exaggerating what you can get out of the activity you're engaged in, then in effect, the motivation bringing you to the object will prevent you from entering into a deep state of concentration by itself. And this is, again, a huge problem in meditation. And I think it's actually much more difficult when you start doing rumination meditation, which is what we're doing here, right? So this is an extremely important point. This is an extremely important point, and you should do your best. Do your best to try to incorporate this into your understanding. So, and then alternate aspect, he's saying, when you're not focusing on any of the afflictive emotions at all, this is called concentration, right? So recall when we were doing, opening the 4 sense gates, right? Or the 5 external sense gates, right? So when we were opening the 5 external sense gates during meditation training, the primary effort, again, was this akala, right? Was fudomyo. The primary effort was how to cut attachment and aversion through the activity of simply being able to abide with the 5 sense gates open. You see? And so this is why, over the course of 4 days, 5 days, you're able to generate much more significant concentration than normal. Because you're training your mind in keeping the mind open, right? Keeping the mind, how do I put this? So you're deepening your concentration because you're learning how to stop your mind from engaging in a specific activity through intent, right? So initially, you do something like intensive breath meditation, where you place the attention on the nostril, for example, and you engage deep intent, strong intent, forceful conveying, remember, is what Von Rinpoche said. And through forceful conveying, forceful intent, you bring the mind to the object. Okay, right? This is the first step. Then, once you have some capability, bringing the mind to an object with forceful intent, then the mind calms down a little bit, and you do something like body scanning meditation. Okay, fine. Through body scanning meditation, the mind becomes more calm, more lucid, more stable. Okay, fine. Then, through the mind becoming more calm, more lucid, more stable, then the next thing is you need to be able to begin stabilizing your ability to rest in a state of awareness that doesn't include raga, attachment, or pratika, right? Anger, aversion. And how do you stabilize that? One way to stabilize that as a layperson living in the real world is that you open the 5 sense gates. And then whatever appears, you have some skill in being able to simply rest the mind in a state of unbiased awareness. Right? So here, even though it's not being explicitly said in that way, you can have the same takeaway on 219, which is if you concentrate on a sentence, he says, if you concentrate on a sentence about objects of attachment, even one sentence about objects of attachment, from the beginning to the end, you'll be focusing on the mind of attachment, right? So this mind of attachment, raga, is the mind that exaggerates the positive qualities of some object, which we've gone over at some length. If you go back to the retreat, I talk about it again and again. When you're focusing on any of the afflictive emotions at all, when you're not focusing on any of the afflictive emotions at all, klesha, right, which you can look up, this is called concentration. So when your mind is not disturbed, naturally, that state of mind, he said, is called concentration. Therefore, so the point that he's making here is don't with attachment cling on to these advanced practices. Don't out of attachment try to do all these advanced practices you can't do and not succeed at those practices, right? Or you exaggerate the benefit of some practice to the point where you're chasing things that you're not actually capable of, instead of doing what you're actually capable of as it's being described here in the text, for example, or being described by your teachers. So something that you're capable of is placing the mind on the breath. Something you're capable of is doing body scanning. Something you're capable of is maybe opening 1 or 2 of the sense doors. But if you can't open all 5 sense doors, and you can't open the consciousness sense door, etc., if you can't actually do those practices, then you're just chasing some experience you had, or chasing some experience you want to have with attachment, which isn't taking you further down the path. Okay? So the way that they describe that is sometimes they use this analogy positively and sometimes negatively. But he says it's like a dog who's given food and gulps it down without chewing, right? So sometimes they use that in a positive sense, that you're extremely eager to learn what you can learn, and other times they use it in a negative sense that, you didn't actually digest the material you were being given, you just kept getting more and more and more material without actually understanding it. But right. Yes. So it's really fascinating, actually, the way that these texts are laid out. So for those of you who don't know what the deal with this text is, there was a text that was given as an oral teaching initially. This was given face-to-face, and then it was collected by Trijang Rinpoche and turned into a book. And so there's a lot of personal advice in here interspersed with the main topics, which makes it, so we jump around a little bit as we go through to explain these points, but I think there's a certain benefit to doing it in that way. So for example, he now says, the old Kadampas, and this is not the new Kadampa tradition, that you don't want to be getting involved with the new Kadampa tradition. But the old Kadampas, which are sort of the old school hardcore practitioners in Tibet, says, so this is Pavon Rinpoche first, he says, next, if you spend your life engaged solely in practicing and learning the Dharma, it will be as the previous Kadampas stated, and the quote is, a great deal of listening with very little meditation is the cause of becoming insensitive to the Dharma. Pavon Rinpoche continues, you should understand that the reason for the Lama teaching Dharma is so that the disciple will practice. If we give the concise essential meaning, the 50 verses of Guru devotion state, what need is there to expound on this any further? You should sincerely apply yourself by doing whatever pleases your guru and forsaking all that causes displeasure. As this states, Bhagwan Rinpoche continues, as this states, you should practice to the best of your ability all that is pleasing to your guru and abandon all things that are displeasing. So what is most displeasing to you, or to a person who has great qualities in terms of meditative capability? What's most displeasing to them is you not doing the practice, right? Because that keeps you trapped in samsara. That keeps you trapped in suffering. And their mind's filled with loving kindness and compassion. So they're driving. Their whole drive is to get you out of the situation that you're in. So the thing that's most displeasing to them is not that you didn't bring them a packet of oranges, it's that you didn't do the practice that liberates your mind, right? That's what's most displeasing. What's most pleasing is the opposite, that you do whatever it is you can now, based upon the instructions, whatever it is you can now to actually make progress, right? To actually begin to make progress and get out of samsara, get out of suffering. Okay, so on 220 now, page 220, we now carry on to talking about how to actually do a session of meditation. And I think I'll just read some of this because it's good stuff. But several of the people that are involved in the course were not Buddhist, so some of this is specific to Buddhists. So the title of the next section is A Repeated Explanation and a Concise Teaching on How to Sustain That According to the Previous Explanation. So how do you sustain your guru devotion, right? How do you sustain the feeling that you have, to go back a little further, that you have deep respect for your teacher, right? This is from the perspective of meditating solely on the way to rely upon the spiritual guide in a single session. So he's saying, I'm about to give you some advice for how to meditate on guru devotion in one session. He said, if you're engaging in mere scanning meditation, and for those of you who did the retreat, I believe I called that reviewing meditation during the retreat. So how does this work? Basically, it's like preparing for an exam in a Western school or Western university. So the first type of meditation that Bhagwan Rinpoche, or one of the first types of meditation Bhagwan Rinpoche describes is, it's like looking at a map from far away where you don't actually dive in. You don't actually go down and see what's there. You're just standing from far away and you go, oh, well, that's this region over here, and there's this region and that region and so on the map. So Bhagwan Rinpoche is saying, if you're engaging in mere scanning meditation, it's permissible to go over all the headings briefly in each session as a way of performing scanning meditation. If you're striving to attain realizations, you should continue until you gain thorough experience of each heading. However, the way of carrying this out in combination with placement meditation will be explained extensively later. Right, so he's saying, I'm not going to describe to you exactly how to combine concentration meditation with analysis, because I'm going to tell you how to do that in great detail later on, which of course he is. And then he describes all of the preliminary prayers that you should do, including Lamrim prayer and so on and so forth. And then he goes on to say on 221 that taking breaks between sessions is very important. Oh, actually, one thing on 220. So, from the very start of your meditation, he says, you should not create bad habits. Therefore, it's good to spread out your meditations into numerous short sessions. So for those who did the retreat, numerous short sessions, right? Numerous short sessions. We did 10 short sessions every day, right? Relatively short sessions. And when we started the retreat, we did 1 or 2 sessions of breath, concentration on the breath meditation, and then we would take a long break. And then middle of the day, we had a very long break. And then end of the day, we had a very long break, right? Until we got to the end when we had built up some capability. So he says on 221, as you gain familiarity, it's permissible to extend the length of the session. So in the same way that during retreat, for example, we started to gain familiarity and it became normal, right? That's what they mean by familiarity, that something becomes normal. So as it became normal, right? As the practice of concentration during retreat became normal, then we extended the session. So in order to not create bad habits, he argues here, even if you're doing something like rumination meditation on the subject of guru devotion, even in that case, to not create bad habits, do it in short sessions. However, he says, how you treat your breaks in between sessions is very important. Right. So here he continues on 221, the session breaks are very important. If you let your mind become engaged in whatever happens to come along during session breaks, you will demolish what little progress you have so carefully made during the session. For example, although you may meditate on impermanence during the session, if you generate nothing but thoughts of grasping at permanence during session breaks, then the careful application, the careful work you did, the careful application you undertook during the session will be undermined. The same thing also applies to other topics like guru devotion, and therefore you must implement methods so that whatever you meditated on during the session does not deteriorate during the session breaks. Therefore, if you read texts taught by the teacher, in this case capital T, there's no capitals in Tibetan. I would be interested to see what the Tibetan there was, but he could either be referring to Lama Tsongkhapa there, or he could be referring to the Buddha. He says, together with their commentaries, therefore, if you read texts taught by the teacher together with their commentaries that directly relate to your practice during the actual session, the session break will be strengthened and enhanced by the session, and the session will be further enhanced by the session breaks. So, what are we talking about here? What we're talking about here is this. During the retreat, for example, we had 10 sessions, and my advice to you during the breaks was, even if you're at home, even if you have responsibilities, do those responsibilities with as much of the techniques that we're working on during the actual sessions as you can. So if we're working on body scanning, maintain your awareness of your body during the breaks in between. If we were doing opening the sense gates, try to keep at least your visual sense gate open, let's say, during the break, right? If we were working on opening the consciousness sense gate and keeping your awareness sort of pulled in from the 5 external senses and being aware of consciousness itself, then try to maintain either the 5 sense gates open but non-reactive, or try to bring the attention inward so that the mind, it has at least part of your mind is resting and aware of consciousness at all times, right? So, in the same way, what he's saying here is, when you start doing rumination meditation, which is the vast majority of what you find in the Lam Rim, where you are contemplating a topic, generating a new attitude, motivation, intention, or understanding, and then holding that with concentration, yeah? So when you do that kind of practice, then it's very important that during the breaks, if you're working on a particular topic, that you try to continue to consume content, arguments, reasons, etc., that support whatever it is, whatever rumination you're working on. If you consume the opposite of that, then you'll damage the progress you're making during your sessions. So if you've taken on doing Lam Rim style practice, and you're trying to go from, you know, if you've taken on Lam Rem style practice and you're trying to go from being an ordinary being to being an extraordinary spiritual practitioner, then at least according to these standards, your goal is, let's say you wake up in the morning, you do your concentration meditation on the breath, you open the visual sense gate and the tactile sense gate. And then you do 5 minutes of rumination on guru devotion, let's say. And maybe you apply an argument like this. You say, someone is teaching me something that I can tell is really genuinely helping my mind. Okay? The only thing that person really wants is for me to put these instructions into practice. What a waste it would be on my part if I didn't put these into practice. Wow, what a disrespect to the time, the effort, the energy, the compassion this person has showed if I didn't put that into practice. Wow, right? And then when you get that feeling, man, to repay their kindness, I should put these teachings into practice. And then when that attitude occurs, maybe it starts around here and it starts to sort of spread upwards and downwards and out through the limbs and so forth. When it fills your whole body up, the same way that if you're overwhelmed by lust or anger or any other sort of feeling or attitude, it sort of fills up your whole system. Once that new attitude of, I really need to repay this kindness, fills up the system, then you hold it with concentration. In the same way that you hold your mind on the breath, or the same way you hold your mind on full body awareness, or you hold the mind on visual awareness, or whatever it is. Yeah? So, like this, during the session, you generate this attitude. And then, since you're working on realizing or actualizing this attitude into your natural condition, so that the natural reaction you have anytime you think of your guru is, wow, so much respect. I have so much humility in the face of this person. I really want to put their teachings into practice and respect the time and energy and compassion they've put in, right? I really want to repay their kindness somehow. When that's the natural feeling that comes up as soon as you think of your guru, then you have quote-unquote realized guru devotion. Yeah? So when that feeling comes up, and you generate it and you hold it in the mind, then the next thing is, how do you enhance it throughout the day rather than damaging it? Okay, well, you enhance it throughout the day rather than damaging it by one thing you can do, he says here, while developing reliance upon the spiritual guide, you should focus on presentations, so teachings, etc., of that, such as the stages of the path, which is this text and many others like it, biographies of qualified beings, so you can read the biographies of great beings that give you inspiration, and look at how they relied on their gurus, for example. Yeah, he gives a lot of other advice here. There's some advice related to tantric practice. The system of restraining the doors of the senses is different from that taught during the generation stage. In general, develop an awareness of pleasing objects and displeasing objects causes us to subsequently generate attachment, hatred, and so forth. Therefore, in this practice, we block the generation of attachment for the 6 pleasing objects and the hatred of the 6 displeasing objects that is subsequently generated by not allowing the mind to engage in whatever appears to your consciousness. For that, we try not to come into contact with any object. Oh, right. Okay, so this is now talking a bit more like full-on retreat. And even if we do not come into contact with any object, and even if we do come in contact with any object, we rely upon the antidote to prevent us from developing attachment and so forth. It is very important that we do not engage in the object we encounter, and therefore we should abandon. Right. Okay. So, if you are, once again, as a layperson living in the world, living in cities, working, if you are having relationships, etc., etc. You need a method that actually allows you to reduce attachment and reduce aversion in the midst of ordinary activity. So, of course, if you're talking about advanced forms of practice, there are methods for doing that. But if you're talking about sort of not into tantric stuff yet, then the best thing I have found for lay people living in the world are the techniques that I taught during retreat. And in the rumination meditation section, since with rumination meditation, for example, you are replacing the emotional content that's normally on the surface of the mind with different emotional content that something positive, something beneficial. Well, that's something, therefore, you can take out into the world. That's something you can take into the world that is not reliant on the world to be any different. Is this making sense? So, let me see here. Furthermore, the other technique that I taught during retreat is opening the sense gates, right? So if you open the 5 sense gates, then it doesn't matter what circumstance you encounter. Any circumstance you encounter, if you can open the sense gates and keep the sense gates open, then attachment and aversion are either not present or they are way less, way less than normal, right? And so, as a general bit of advice here, he's saying if you're working on, for example, training the mind in Lamrim topics, and you've decided to work on Guru devotion, and you generate this attitude of Guru devotion during one of your sessions, and you hold that for a period of time, and then you're taking a break. You're in between sessions, right? One thing you can do to enhance what you got out of the session is to not allow your mind to chase attachment and aversion around during the break. Yeah? So, let me see. So, as I recommended before and will recommend again, one of the best things you can do there is to train in body scanning, opening the tactile sense gate, opening the other 4 sense gates, and then opening the consciousness sense gate. If you can do those practices, then virtually anything that you encounter, you can turn into actual training, and you can, you can turn it into actual training, and you can, begin to reduce attachment and aversion right in the midst of all of your daily activities, and therefore you can support the type of practice that he's talking about here. Yeah? Okay. Let's see. There's a whole short section here. There's a short section here on 222 about abandoning your homeland. I don't have too much to say about that because that's mainly, in my humble view, that's mainly aimed at monastics. But more generally, he says, we will continue to generate attachment and hatred, so raga and pratika, right, for objects such as forms, sounds, and so on, right down to something as simple as a cup of tea. Therefore, it's extremely important that we don't come into contact with such objects. So, you know, it's interesting, you know, even if you went and lived in a cave, if you went, you know, if you were a Tibetan and you went and you lived in a cave, they're going to bring you Tibetan food. So, you know, unless you went and did retreat completely in a different country or something, you're going to encounter objects of attachment and aversion. So even if you don't, quote unquote, abandon your homeland and abandon all these things you find comfortable, really the heart of the practice, the real heart of the practice, both from the perspective of something like sutra level Mahamudra or just sitting style practice from Zen, Hello, hello, hello. Uh, Someone said hello in the chat there. So, even if you're not going to abandon outright physically things in the world, which I don't recommend, by the way, because that doesn't actually fix the problem. How to say? Let me back up a little bit. So the way that I was taught and continue to be taught is not actually that you need to pull away from the world, right? What the actual advice is that you need to generate states of mind that cannot be moved by the content of the world. And for some of you that did retreat with me recently, for example, you found for yourself. Nobody needs to convince you now. You know this is how your mind actually works. Somebody in the chat asked what religion we're discussing here. We're discussing Buddhism. So, how to say? So that we know the problem isn't with the world. The problem isn't with the world. The problem is with our mind, with our own perceptual and conceptual processes. And so if you can change the way that your mind engages with objects of experience, then you can actually begin to make progress against things like pratika and raga, right? So that's the actual advice. Because even if you went into retreat somewhere in Tibet in the mountains, they're going to bring you sampa and they're going to bring you tea and you're going to be eating Tibetan food. And there's all sorts of stories, even in the Buddha mentioned on one occasion, for example, that there was one of his monks had got a new set of robes right before he died, and then took rebirth as a flea because he was so attached to the robes that he had been given that were so nice right at the end of his life. So there's really no amount of just getting away from stuff that will fix these problems that are being discussed in a Buddhist context. Now, of course, as some of you have experienced, if you go on retreat and you create boundary, right? If you put boundaries in place, you can make more progress. But because those boundaries are temporary and artificial, it's going to be very, very difficult to maintain those once you get back out there in the wild of your real life, right? So, let's carry on here. We're at about 40 minutes. I'm going to stop at the hour, I believe. Let's see how far I want to get. Okay, I might be able to get to 225. Yeah, so he's carrying on here on 222, talking about going into retreat, and he's talking about all of the preparations you would need to make to do that. Yeah, and obviously if you're going to go into retreat, for example, if you're going to go into retreat and try to gain much deeper experience of these teachings that we're discussing, then in those cases, of course, you want to minimize distraction, you want to get rid of, like we did, we took the Mahayana precepts, we were only eating 2 meals a day, you're cutting out all distractions, you're cutting out social media, etc., right? So, sorry, give me a moment here. So, let's see. So, right, then he goes on to say basically what I just said. Thus, it would be good for us to rely upon somewhere between, oh, right, sorry. It makes no difference whether the objects that increase our afflictive emotions are from another area or our own. However, when we encounter objects, if we don't grasp at characteristics of good and bad, thinking this is attractive, this is unattractive, they will not be capable of generating attachment, hatred, and so on. So once again, he's saying if you're going into retreat and you're trying to actually make progress through going into retreat, you need to be able to reduce, in particular, attachment and aversion, right? So if you're trying to reduce attachment and aversion, you have to be able to stop your mind from chasing things you find attractive and running away from things you find unattractive. Or, to put another way, chasing things you find pleasant and interesting and not boring, and running away from things you find unpleasant and boring and unwanted, right? And this is true of virtually anything. You know, if you were trying to, I don't know, eat a healthier diet, for example, and you absolutely hate eating anything green, you have to overcome this feeling of not wanting to experience the sensations associated with green things, or you're not going to be able to complete your intent of eating in a healthier way, for example, right? So this is actually the kind of advice that helps you become successful in numerous areas, not just in the area of entering retreat and being successful in retreat. And in particular, in this case, he's talking about going into retreat and trying to realize the topics of the Long Rim. Let's see. So he's giving a lot of kind of general advice here, going to 223. Right, this is for those of you who attended the retreat. He's talking now about, okay, so you have entered retreat, or you're trying to do more intensive practice. If you try to do more intensive practice, Shantideva says in the Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, what is the use of a multitude of activities other than the courageous action of protecting the mind? So how do you protect the mind? It says a little bit earlier, well, you do that using mindfulness or introspection, or basically being aware of your own body and mind, right? So this is actually the advice that I try to give people that are training in the real world to try to, this is the kind of advice you need to take on board. If you want to make progress against your problems internally, then what you have to do is become aware of the content of your mind, and you have to become aware of what your body is doing. And so this is why the 5 foundations, for example, in the way that I teach meditation, are in the order that they're in. First, you place your mind on the breath, you can hold it there. Second, you train in scanning meditation because it makes the mind calm and it makes you aware of your body. Third, now you need to learn how to do that kind of activity while actually doing stuff in the world. And then you open all of the other sense gates so that you become aware of all the components that make up your being. Yeah? And in doing that, you also reduce attachment and aversion. And therefore, whatever progress you make, to now tie it all the way back to the beginning of this particular section, to tie it back to that, remember what we're talking about here is what do you do between meditation sessions? Well, the only way that you're going to be able to maintain what you gained during the meditation session is if you have enough awareness to carry the benefits over from the session that you were in into your actual life. Yeah? And so this is why I put rumination as number 5 in the set of skills of meditation, among many other reasons, is that you need to have all these other skills in place to maintain the benefits of whatever you gain in rumination during your ordinary life. Yeah, there's so much fantastic advice in these texts. So again, on 223, Atisha, who's the great reviver of Buddhism in Tibet, he was invited by the Tibetans through great effort and sacrifice, was invited by the Tibetans after Buddhism had declined in Tibet after its initial period of, I think, 300 or 400 years of, gosh, who was it? I'm forgetting the name now. But there were a couple great practitioners who initially brought it to Tibet, and then after some time it declined, and then it was revived and reestablished by Atisha, mainly by Atisha. And so in Atisha's text, Bodhisattva Jewel Garland, he says, "Examine your speech when you are among many, examine your mind when you are alone." So he says the main thing you should do if you're around other people is just be aware of what you're saying. And he doesn't say it here, but obviously you should be aware of what you're physically doing. Right? Okay. Yeah. Okay, and then Kadam Geshe Ben Gungel said, "I have no other task than to hold the spear of the antidote at the castle gates of my mind. When the afflictions increase their strength, I also increase my strength. When they relax, I relax as well." Paul Rinpoche continues, "To be on guard in the battle against the afflictive emotions of body, speech, and mind, Geshe Ben would also place a small white pebble in a pile for each virtuous thought that occurred, and a small black pebble for each negative thought that occurred. When a virtuous thought arose, he would extend his right hand and say, such and such and such." You can read that on your own. Right. So Geshe Ben is an interesting character. He lived a very colored life, a very colorful life. Did a lot of bad things, and then he became a monk, and then became a Geshe, and then he had some very unusual behaviors that were quite funny, but also quite charming in a way. And so, on one occasion he put his hand into a container of tea, for example, and he was about to steal some tea, and then he remembered that he has a vow not to steal, but he had been a thief previously, and so he grabbed his own hand out of the tea and he started yelling, "I caught a thief! I caught a thief!" Anyways, so what else is important here? Let's see. So Shantideva's text, A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, is really fascinating. If you read through it, the practical advice, let's say, seems, on the first reading, maybe even the second or third reading, seems to be quite scant. You can read through it and go, wow, this just seemed to be sort of like a lot of one-off kind of punchy arguments about practice and about how to live in the world, and where's the sort of systematic hardcore, because Shantideva is a great scholar, and you think, well, where's the hardcore sort of advice for how to do all these great practices? This is supposed to be a text for bodhisattvas, the great heroes of awakening mind. Where's all the advice for the great heroes? And it takes some time to realize that actually what he's doing is he's providing you with a series of rumination meditations that develop the intentions and motivations that are the path. What is it, for example, that makes someone a Buddhist or not Buddhist? Anyone in the chat? So, what makes something a quote-unquote path practice versus something that you're aspiring to do, an aspirational practice, is whether or not you have that particular motivation or thing actually in your mind. That's what decides if you're on the path or if you're not on a particular path. Whether you're walking the path or you're not walking the path has to do with whether a particular thing is actually in your mind or not. So one of my teachers, who was an absolutely astonishing practitioner, spent, on one period of time, spent 6 months in retreat doing 16 hours a day of practice, 4 4-hour sessions, okay? Absolutely incredible practitioner. He said, my main practice is trying to hold refuge in my mind. And for those of you who don't know what refuge is sort of what most people consider the most basic thing in the whole system. That you have respect for the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, and you see those as your main teachers and main inspiration. And he said, that's my practice. So, these things are actually not easy. These practices are actually not easy to do. And what makes you a path practitioner of Buddhism is that you hold refuge in your mind. That's part of your motivational makeup, part of your motivational matrix, part of your motivational architecture internally when you're making decisions from day to day, when you're making decisions from moment to moment. That's what makes you Buddhist. If that's not what you do, then you're not Buddhist. Or at least you're not Buddhist during that period of time. Right? And if you're trying to, quote unquote, become a bodhisattva, right? If you're trying to become a great Mahayana practitioner, what is it that makes you a Mahayana practitioner instead of a Theravada practitioner or just an ordinary person doing ordinary things? Well, if you ask Atisha in Atisha's Lamp for the Path, which is like this incredible text he wrote for the Tibetans to distill the entire wisdom of the Nalanda tradition, you know. They had a library that rivaled the Library of Alexandria. He distilled this entire corpus down to a few pithy statements. And he said there are 3 levels of motivation, just 3. If you're a practitioner, the first you could divide maybe into 2, which is basically you don't think much about the next life at all, and you're just trying to sort of live in this life as best you can, and to not hurt anyone and use Buddhist principles, and that's fine. That's sort of one level, but the most basic level. And then he said the next level of Buddhist practitioner is someone who's aimed at future lives, where their main motivation that carries them, that influences every decision they make, is that they're trying to create good karma and avoid negative karma, so that they can have a better rebirth. Because this is something the Buddha said is possible and is worth doing for a number of reasons. If you don't complete your practice in this lifetime, it would be nice to have another lifetime where your situation was at least as good as this one. So that's going to require good karma, and it's going to require avoiding negative karma. So that's the first sort of level of real practitioner, according to Atisha. So when that's part of your motivation and intention every day, you're at the first level of real practice. The next level is renunciation. What does that mean? Renunciation doesn't mean that you don't own anything. That's physical renunciation. But as the Buddha described in the Pali Canon, even if you're attached to your robes as a monk, then you don't have renunciation. If you're attached to your bald head as a monk, you don't have renunciation. So renunciation means that you have looked at the suffering situation of samsara that occurs from lifetime to lifetime, and you are intent on definitely emerging from samsara, which is the literal translation of renunciation, definite emergence. In other words, you want to attain nirvana. So when your main motivation for most of the things that you do, most of the time, is that you must attain nirvana. And the Buddha said, that motivation should be so powerful. It's like a person whose hair or clothing is on fire, right? So this is not like a subtle thing that's, you think about occasionally. That this is a powerful motivation driving your actions from moment to moment. Then, at that point, you're a Theravada practitioner, right? And then what is it that makes you a Mahayana practitioner? It's when, from moment to moment, as if your hair was on fire, there's a powerful drive to free all sentient beings from suffering and to attain awakening in order to free all sentient beings from suffering. And that's what mainly drives your motivation. So in brief, it's not just that you believe that enlightenment is possible, for example, and therefore whatever, oh yes, there are Buddhas and I'd like to become a Buddha. No, it's that you have this powerful moment-by-moment intention and motivation to attain awakening in order to remove the suffering of all sentient beings. That is what makes you a Mahayana practitioner. How do you develop that? Well, you go through rumination meditations. And so when you look at the Shantideva Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Shantideva's whole text is just a bunch of rumination meditations, right? By and large, that's what it is. It's not this detailed scholarly endeavor. It's a bunch of arguments and thoughts and reasons to try to move your emotions and move your mind and develop motivation. Even in the section on concentration, the whole chapter on concentration is like just a bunch of arguments about why you shouldn't be chasing your mind around in the way that you are. Okay? And then so in a similar way, here again in Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva Way of Life, he says, a crazy, untamed elephant in this world cannot inflict the same kind of harm as the wild elephant of the mind. Right? And the reason for this, of course, is Shantideva has the view, as does every major Buddhist saint, etc., that there's more than one lifetime, right? And so your mind can create, first of all, even in this lifetime, we've created nuclear weapons, we've created all sorts of things that create astonishing harm, far beyond what a mad elephant just running through a city could create. But furthermore, our mind can create entire realms of suffering. And this is described in the earliest Buddhist materials, that you can take rebirth in unbelievably horrific, terrible, painful circumstances that are so much worse than just getting an injury in this life or anything else of the kind. Okay. So I think you could probably read the rest of this section on your own, but again, the point is, what do you do in between sessions, right? What you do in between sessions is you try to watch your mind, and you try to reduce negative emotion, and you try to continue to consume things that support whatever topic it is you're working on in terms of your rumination practice for the Lam Rim. So in the case of Guru devotion, which is sort of the first unofficial topic of the Lam Rim, or the first official topic of the Lam Rim, depending on who you ask, in that case, you're contemplating all of these reasons to help you become a better student. Okay, think about it like this. You go to, you're trying to get a degree, let's say, in accounting, something not so interesting, fine. Or maybe accounting is the most interesting thing in the world to you. That's fine also. So you're trying to get a degree in accounting, you sign up for the university course, and now you have to actually make it through all the study materials. Well, how do you motivate yourself to do that? Well, if you think again and again, God, this is going to be so expensive, there's so much money, I shouldn't waste all of this money by not putting in the time and effort required to actually get this degree and do it properly, right? And you can think, how incredible would it be if I become top of my class and I'm able to make a bunch of money to benefit my family and give to charity? How incredible would that be? Oh, that'd be so incredible. So people, when you're trying to do something difficult, you spend time thinking about the reasons why it's worth it to do that difficult thing. And you spend, someone in the chat said they're trying to get a degree. So if you're trying to get a degree, then to keep yourself motivated for all the study and the sacrifice and everything you do, you have to think about, well, here's all the benefits I get from doing this, and here's all the downside I avoid by doing this, right? So you think about all the benefits you get from doing it, and all the sort of bad stuff that you get to avoid by doing it, right? So benefits and downside you consider, and this creates powerful motivation. So in the same way, you contemplate the benefits of relying properly on a spiritual teacher, and the downside of not relying on the spiritual teacher, as we discussed many, many weeks ago now, many months ago. And that gives you this powerful motivation to get the most out of your relationship with your teachers, right? So this is very practical, kind of normal advice. It's actually not some weird Eastern thing or something. Okay, so I think we're at an hour now, so the next time we carry on, we'll pick it up from 225. And if you don't have the text and you want to start joining in on these sessions, I'm going to be carrying on with this series now using YouTube Live instead of doing it on Facebook, as I said in the description. So this will be a regular ongoing thing. And for those of you who watched this and have no idea what intensive breath meditation or body scanning or opening the sense gates or these other practices are, there's another playlist on this channel that describes what those practices are. And if you want to understand how to meditate on lam-rim subjects, and you want to understand how to meditate on at least half, if not like 90% of Buddhist subjects, you have to understand what rumination meditation is. So that is also described amongst the 5 foundations of meditation, the sort of 5 cognitive skills that I teach for training in Buddhist subjects as a city-dwelling layperson. So if you have found this much, much later or whatever, and you have no idea what the heck we're talking about, just go back and look at those. Go back and look at those videos from the 5 Foundations course, and that will teach you the techniques. Then you can actually meditate on the subjects in this text with some great effect. Okay? All right. With that, I'm going to call it a day. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.